Let's stand up and say good morning. And turn to the people next to you and say good morning. All right, now you can sit down again. Thank you. I just want to say a few words by opening today's program and start again by thanking you for being here. Some basic housekeeping items. I was supposed to remind you yesterday and forgot, but the hashtag for this event is P4PGH18. So if you're into Twitter, please use it. We have our social wall, which is keeping track of all of the top tweets that are happening. It's disconnected from the Washington one, so don't worry about that. Outside in the main hallway, and hopefully you'll get a chance to look at what's collecting there. I would also like to point out to you that you should all have complimentary copies of two books on your tables. One is by Henry Timms on New Power, who will be speaking at the end of the day. Incredibly worthwhile presentation and book that I hope you'll be learning from. And a book on the new localism by Bruce Katz. And Bruce is really one of the main progenitors of the thinking around the importance of cities as engines of change in modern society. So please take those with you and read them in good faith. I think you'll enjoy them. I want to take a moment to recognize Court Gould, who has been a key partner to this enterprise for all 3 years that we have done P4. But many of you may have heard that Court is moving on to, I don't know if you'd call it greener pastures, but eerie pastures, to take on a new role as head of grant making for the Erie Community Foundation. And I would like us all to thank Court for a moment for the work he's done to make this happen. I'm also supposed to warn you that we will have a different dismissal process for lunch today, but I'm not allowed to tell you what it is right now. I'll be back right before lunch to tell you how that's going to proceed, but just take a note of the table number that you're sitting at because it will have something to do with that. I had, before I introduce our next speaker, I had one slide to share with you last night. And by the way, wasn't Mustafa Ali amazing? But I had one slide to share with you last night, and I'm only going to share one with you this morning to help frame what I hope will be the spirit of the day. And if the magicians in the back could bring this one up, please. I am so, like many of us, so struck by this young woman every time I look at the images of her, and not her alone, the other Parkland survivors as well, but for whom this iconic image seems to symbolize many of them. And I worry for her actually, because I think so many people who are attached to this photo and to what she's done look at her and say, boy, what a powerful flame, and I hope that flame continues to burn brightly. And there is only one way that happens, and it's that if instead of viewing her as the flame, we all take her light from her. There's a saying that the light of a single flame is not diminished by lighting 10,000 candles. And so the question in social change is so often, how do we not rely on one person to be the change agent, but to take the light from them and light our own candle and contribute to the light itself. This is why Thomas Jefferson, in a very different era, speaking about how liberty comes to be, said that one man with courage is a majority. And today we might phrase that one fierce young woman is a majority. But the way we become a majority is when others around us take that light from us and don't just depend on us to be the light for them. I've been struck by the Parkland tragedy in particular because of a personal narrative that for me started around guns. I grew up around guns. I grew up in Colorado shooting guns. In my, 30s, early in my career working for Teresa Heinz, she was invited by Sarah Brady to join then Governor Casey in a campaign to ban assault weapons in the state of Pennsylvania. And I don't care where you stand on guns, whether you have guns in your house, whether you believe they're useful for hunting. Absolutely nobody on the planet other than a military personnel needs an assault weapon. And that seemed really logical, and it was backed up by the chiefs of police in the state of Pennsylvania, and Teresa agreed to take on this role. And she was still in a stage of, I think, mourning and grieving over the death of her late husband, but she felt that this was important. And I, as loyal as I am to her, was very protective of her. And what happened to her as that campaign unfolded was viciousness of precisely the sort that we've seen directed at the Parkland students. So I wasn't surprised by what happened to them at all. Both Governor Casey and Teresa had their pictures of their faces put on targets and used at target ranges. And if you just think for a moment about the violence and the hatred that is expressed in that act of turning somebody whose idea you oppose into a target for your violence, this is precisely the thing that we are so often fighting against in our society. It was the era when the National Rifle Association, which is absolutely a villain in this story, had begun to talk to its constituents in terms of needing to defend themselves from their own government, who they characterized, for example, as jackbooted thugs. And not surprisingly, we saw Timothy McVeigh bomb the federal building in Oklahoma City. And we've seen 20 years now of attacks on government itself and on other people under the guise of we need our guns to protect our freedom against the very government that was put here in a democratic society to protect us. And our politicians have cowardly refused to engage on this issue, preferring instead to counsel that we should, every time there is a shooting, we should stop. It's too soon to talk about it, and we should engage in thoughts and prayers. And the funny thing about those thoughts and prayers is that they never result in the action where change actually begins to take place, because that's the strategy. And you know, there's a brilliant thing that Cervantes once wrote, which I've always taken personally around my own writing and things I don't get to, but I think it fits perfectly in the context of social change. He wrote that down the street of by and by, you come eventually to the house of never. And for so many of us who procrastinate, that is a profoundly personal message. But at a societal level, what we have been doing on this issue and so many others is waiting, accepting that we will get to it in the by and by. And the by and by never comes. And so what was different about Parkland was that suddenly something shifted. And the temptation is to believe that it's because of, and simply because of, the extraordinary children who were affected in that tragedy, and they're social media savvy. And that's certainly the case. But there was a world of people behind them. There were family, there were friends, there were teachers, they were well educated, they were supported by their teachers, they understood how to engage, and they understood something a lot of us in this room don't, which is social media, which was part of their advantage as well. But at the end of the day, it was the simplest, oldest act in the book of standing up and raising a fist like you did yesterday and crying power and this time having it crack through. Now, are we there yet in terms of changes in gun laws? No. But are we beginning to see changes in gun laws and the possibilities of change? Yes. And I think anybody who's paying attention feels that something in the culture has shifted and that something is a product of what those students have done, but also what Sarah Brady did. And I hope what Teresa Heinz and Governor Casey did, and I hope what Gabby Giffords did, and I hope what so many other people in our culture on this issue have done to express their discontent. Here's the message for Pittsburgh. We tend to look outside of ourselves for agency, but the agency comes right back to us in the end. The activist and writer Rebecca Solnit has said something in a Dharma talk I listened to once that it just struck me, and I haven't seen it written down anywhere, but I use it a lot in sharing thoughts on this with folks. She said, you know what you do. And this is actually a lecture she received from her partner. She said, you know what you do, but you don't know what you do does. And so often what we come up against in the work that we do to change the issues that we're going to be talking about today is a sense that I am one small person. And in my one small personhood or in my one organizational seat, I don't really have the power to change the world. And that is the absolute enemy of every change that has ever happened in the course of our country and of improving the planet that we live on. The power actually comes from not knowing what will come of our actions and having faith that something will. We're actually going to be talking about that a little bit today, especially when we get to Henry Timms at the end of the day and a discussion about new power. Because as a result, partly of the technology that also succeeds in dividing us, we are seeing an emergence of power that can be utilized for good and broadly, and that can make more apparent how you can see the good that what you do does. So I encourage you to keep that in mind during the day. There's a wonderful line at the beginning of Fiddler on the Roof where Tevye says, God, send us the cure, the sickness we've got already. And what I would encourage you to believe is that the cure for the things that challenge Pittsburgh right now and that challenge cities like ours around the country and for which we should be a symbol and a leader of the possibilities of change, the things that challenge us are soluble if you all light each other's candles, one from another, and pass the light to each other and have faith that what you do will make the difference that we see when something finally breaks through. I see it happening right now. It will happen as a result of you. You are the power that we need to change this community and the world. So please keep that in mind as we go through the day. Let me return to the task at hand, which is to introduce our next speaker, our morning keynote speaker, Julian Castro. I only met him yesterday. He's a fabulous man. He speaks with great authority and some reserve and some quietude. He seems to be quite at peace with himself and the message he wants to deliver in the world. He served, as many of you know, under President Obama as from 2014 to 2017 in a capacity of Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. He was a secretary who actually cared about housing and urban development. Yes. He also knows what it's like to operate in an environment like we're talking about because he has been a mayor. He was mayor of San Antonio from 2009 on, where he focused on many of the same things that we're talking about and that mayors around the country who are really trying to change their cities focused on, such as how to attract well-paying jobs for the 21st century industries that the city needed to develop, and how to make sure that everybody in the community had an opportunity to participate in what was being created. Today he is the Dean's Distinguished Fellow and the Fellow of the Davila Chair in International Trade Policy at the University of Texas's Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs, and a really thoughtful guy. And I'm really grateful to him for being here, and I hope you are too, Julian Castro.